Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Sarah and I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at McFarland. And we are very honored to have Rich Staffen with us tonight. Rich works for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources as a terrestrial zoologist, having a new term tonight. And he's been there for a very long time, so he's clearly an expert on this topic, and we get to learn a little bit about the eagles and ospreys here in Wisconsin. So Rich, thank you so much for being here tonight.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. So as Sarah said, I work for the DNR and I work for the Natural Heritage Conservation Program, which was formerly Endangered Resources. So you might have heard of us. And we kind of focus on non-game and rare species. And I work here in Madison in the central office, but I work statewide and have worked on eagles and osprey surveys and other projects for them and other birds of prey for 10 or 15 years now. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about eagles and ospreys, their status and surveys. We're going to give some background, basic information on ecology, their natural history information, like what they eat, aging eagles and osprey, and then some of their nesting habits and other fun facts. And we're going to have a little bit of a quiz so you guys can participate. And then we'll talk a little bit about the eagle and osprey surveys that we used to do for the DNR throughout the state, how we did those surveys, the statewide recovery, which is great news for both of those species, how their numbers have rebounded, and then eagle and osprey monitoring, what that looks like kind of going into the future. We have some great partners that have kind of taken up that aspect of the work, so that's really great. And then just some regulatory issues and kind of health concerns that we still see with the eagle population and osprey populations. So before we get into the quiz, I just thought to give a little bit of history on bald eagle populations. So in 1782, the bald eagle was adopted as their national bird. But as you probably have heard or probably knew last year, that actually became formal. They were officially named as our national bird. So up until that time, it wasn't actually completely formal, but now it is. And historically, they thought that there was about 100,000 nests in the lower 48, so not including Alaska. So yeah, a very high number of nesting pairs in the lower US. And then by 1963, with DDT and loss of habitat and water quality issues, that had decreased all the way down to 417 nesting pairs in the lower 48 states. So pretty dire straits at that time. And then in 1972, the Endangered Species Act came about, and they were pretty much right away added to the endangered species list in 72. And at that time, we had about 100 pairs here in Wisconsin, so for some context there. And then, so the big thing was removal of DDT from the landscape, and that took place during the 70s and 80s, and the numbers started to rebound. There was other environmental acts and laws passed, the Clean Water Act, and some of the habitats have improved and the numbers started to rebound. And so to the point that in 2007, they were both federally and state delisted. And at that time, there was about 10,000 nesting pairs in the lower 48. So not quite back to what they were historically, and in Wisconsin, in 2007, we had a little over 1,100 nesting pairs. And our most recent census, complete statewide survey for Wisconsin, was done in 2019 by the DNR, and we found almost 1,700 nesting pairs in the state. So I just like to, this is kind of old now, but I do like to show just where Wisconsin ranks kind of compared to some of the other states in the US. And basically we've been around like second or third or fourth. So we're still behind Minnesota a little bit. We were behind, this is in 2007 when the delisting occurred. We were behind Florida but we were third with the most bald eagle pairs in the country. And I think I just saw something recently that we're actually, they were estimating that we're tied now with Florida. So Minnesota's still ahead of us, but then there's a kind of a big drop off until you get to Washington State, which is 848 back in that time. But yeah, Wisconsin very important to the national population of bald eagles. So we can take pride in that. And then for osprey, so just a little bit of facts and history. So they're found worldwide. They're on every continent except for Antarctica. They were designated as official provincial bird of Nova Scotia in May of 1994. Not quite as cool as being a national bird like the eagles, but it's something. Historically, they were found throughout Wisconsin. And then kind of that same time frame, in 1973, we were down to less than 100 pairs in Wisconsin. And that's when our state endangered species law went into effect as well. And they were pretty much right away added as a state endangered species. And then their numbers also started to rebound. And by 1989, we had over 300 nesting pairs in the state. And they were downlisted from endangered to threatened at that. Again, yeah, with removal of DDT, the numbers have continued to increase. We'll show some graphs as to how those numbers have pretty much just continued to go up. And then they got to around 500 pairs in 2009. And that's when they were delisted from Wisconsin State Endangered and Threatened list. So the recovery kind of started in the north. That's where they were still hanging on. And they've steadily kind of moved southward. We're still seeing, I'll show a different chart later on a graph where they're starting to fill in the south. This is kind of from 2019 from our breeding bird atlas. This kind of shows their distribution in the state. So still, I mean, very dense in the northwest lakes area. In the northern highlands where there's a high density of lakes, they're very common there. And then we're seeing this kind of filling in the south as well, and including us here in the Madison area, chain of lakes, and Jefferson County too. But they're still really rare in the Driftwoods area, not many over there, probably because there's not a lot of lakes in that part of the state. Okay, so this is where we get into the quiz portion. So feel free to shout out any answers if you want. If not, I'll tell you what they are. But does anybody have a guess as to how many eagle species there are in the world? And then just a quick note that osprey, in comparison, they're the only species in their own separate family, so quite different from eagles. But we have quite a few eagles in the world. Does anybody have a number? 4 or 5. 4 or 5. That would be
100.
100. Close. It's not quite 100, but 60 eagle in the world. That's the famous hardy eagle. So fill a lot of different niches, and some of them look a lot different than our bald eagle. I should have mentioned too when we were talking about history for bald eagle and the national symbol. They are the only eagle that's endemic to North America. So that's kind of cool, the bald eagle that is. Kind of on those same lines, how many species of eagles do we have in Wisconsin? So this, I'll tell you right now, it's a little bit of a trick question. Everybody know? There's 2. So we have 2. Only the bald eagle nest in Wisconsin. But we also get golden eagles here in the winter time. So they come down from northern Canada and maybe some from out west, and they primarily in the Driftwoods area, the western part of the state, is where they'll spend the winter time. So I have this. So there's been some folks that have done some satellite tracking GPS collars on a few golden eagles. So this is one that overwinters here in, there's Eau Claire right here, so in the northern driftless area. They spend basically January into March in Wisconsin, south of Eau Claire. And then so this is their migration route. So the green is their spring, where they're going back to their nesting area. They go way north of Hudson Bay, up there in the red is where they spend their summertime nesting and breeding. Then they come back down, kind of similar path in the fall, and then they work their way over into the driftless area. So very cool that we have both of these species in Wisconsin. And we have probably somewhere between 60 to 100 golden eagles that overwinter each year in the state. There is a golden eagle survey that the National Eagle Center in Wabasha, Minnesota puts on, where people go out for one day, usually in mid-January, and count golden eagles and other raptors and eagles, and basically bald eagles. So a little bit more on bald and golden eagles. I really love this photo. So this is a picture from the Yukon where they captured both a golden eagle and a bald eagle in the same frame. So we get lots of questions about, oh, I think I saw a golden eagle and I think they're nesting in the summer here. We really, we just don't have them nesting in Wisconsin, but we do have, like I said, overwintering ones. But it's easy to understand why people would kind of get confused or think that maybe they're seeing a golden eagle. So these are both juvenile eagles, and we'll talk a little bit about aging them in a bit. But they do look very similar. So they're very dark colors. And we have some different information here. So one thing we talk about is if you look at the size of the head and the neck and the bill on a bald eagle, it's almost comparable in size to the size of the tail. But in a golden eagle, you can kind of see it's fairly short. It's much shorter and much shorter than what the tail length is. So that's one thing you can look for. Another one is the wing profile. So they talk about bald eagles have flat with a straight leading edge, so very straight here. And when they fly, their wings are held very straight. But golden eagles, when they fly, you can kind of pick this up. So they actually have a slight up curve or upturned wings. They call that a dihedral. So I don't know if people know turkey vultures that you might see out flying around. They're kind of the classic V-shaped dihedral where their wings are upturned and it's kind of forms like a V. So you can also kind of see that in a golden eagle. And then they kind of have more angled or curved wings leading to the ends of the wings. So that's the golden eagle. And then, both of them are really dark. So this is like probably a second or third year bald eagle here on the left. They have much more mottled white on the dark background. Whereas the juvenile golden eagle has those white patches on the ends of the wings and then a white patch at the base of the tail. So you can usually see those really well in the field if you're out lucky enough to see a golden eagle. And then there's a little bit about the wing beat. Bald eagles have a much more steady and deep wing pattern when they flap. And the golden eagles is much shallower and slow. That's a little bit more subjective, hard to figure out, I think. So just a little bit on our two species of eagles and how to tell them apart. So we were talking about this before. How much can a bald eagle or osprey nest weigh? It's pretty shocking, actually. So bald eagles actually can weigh up to 2 tons, 4,000 pounds. So they will reuse the same nest and they'll continually each year add more sticks and some twigs to it. So they can get really, really, really big. You could probably park a truck in there. They're so big. Ospreys in comparison are big, but not nearly as big. So usually it could be up to maybe about 400 pounds weight. How many young do bald eagles and osprey normally have? So this one's pretty similar. Bald eagles usually have 1 to 3 young, probably more likely 1 to 2. And typically they only will fledge, only one eaglet will usually survive 2 leaving the nest or fledging, sometimes 2, but usually it's only 1. An osprey usually lays 2 to 4 eggs each year. And also, again, it's usually only 1 that actually makes it to fledging. How long do juvenile bald eagles and ospreys spend in their nest? So here's kind of a chart for this is for bald eagles. So they start nesting usually in early February in southern Wisconsin, or late February and the March. They'll lay eggs by early March and they'll incubate for 30 to 60, probably 40 to 60 days, which takes them into May. Have small young for, in the nest for probably close to 2 months. So they'll usually fledge young in southern Wisconsin by sometime in June, usually by the end of June, they'll fledge. So typically the whole period with eggs and young is about 4 months. So kind of like March through June, southern Wisconsin. And then for osprey, kind of similar, a little bit shorter. So they have a much more condensed nesting season because they migrate. So they'll leave Wisconsin and go down to some of the Gulf states and Central America along the coastlines. And then they'll return usually in May or in March, sorry. And they usually start their nesting season by April. And they'll have usually about 50 to 60 days of young and eggs in the nest, and usually have fledged by sometime in mid to late August. And so the young will still depend on the adults for food for another couple of weeks. And I did see where the young or the adults will actually withhold food from the young to get them to leave and go off on their own. So kind of a harsh reality, but it's time to move on and get out of their hair. Okay, so how long does it take a juvenile bald eagle or osprey to reach adulthood? So here's aging information. So somebody put this graphic together, which I kind of like. So we go from left to right. So here, so essentially, maybe you know that by age 5 is when bald eagles will reach adulthood, maturity. So this is a 4-year-old here. So they start to get the white on the head and white on the tail, but not completely white. And the yellow bill. And then right next to them is a full adult. So age 5 or older, they start to, clearly have, as you're very familiar with, adult white head and white tail, yellow bill. Once they get past 5, you can't really age them anymore. So here we have another adult eating some fish. And then this one here is a 1-year-old. Probably if you see a nest and you see him hanging around the nest, that's pretty much what you see. Very dark eye, dark bill. And then the one next to that is a 3-year-old. So starting to get some white on the head, a little bit of yellow on the bill, yellow eyes by that point. And then the far right one is a 2-year-old bald eagle. So still with the dark brown bill, dark eye, starting to get a little bit more white. So that's how you can age up to 5 years old bald eagles.
I would have thought that one on the right is an osprey by the badger mask,
Yeah.
the dark eyes.
Yeah. Here's an osprey though for comparison. They really have that black streaking and a lot more white. So this is a juvenile, immature osprey, and they look pretty similar to adults. There's a couple little subtle differences. So they have these white tips on some of their dark feathers when they're immature, and they'll reach adulthood, sexual maturity at age 3 to 4. Another thing you might see is kind of like this brown at the top of the chest there. And then they do have when they're newly born for their first year, they have these orange eyes, which in the fall then quickly change to more of a yellow eye. So they're a little bit more challenging to tell apart from the adult osprey, the juveniles. And then for both of these species, you really can't tell a male from a female. The females are slightly bigger in both species. But it's really hard to tell just by looking at them. And what we've seen a lot of raptors is that the female is bigger because they're the ones that have to carry the eggs and incubate the eggs. So they're typically bigger, and we call that reverse sexual dimorphism. So a little bit of difference in the male versus female. But normally, if you think of birds, the male is usually the more colorful one, but in females, it's usually and female raptors, I should say, it's kind of reverse. They're usually bigger and they're maybe a little bit slightly more colorful in subspecies.
You mentioned that the eyes change color. Why?
I don't know why that is. I think it's, yeah, I don't know exactly why that is. It might have to do something with how they can see or how they can, how they can see with the light. Might make it more easy to see as we get older. So what do eagles and ospreys eat? I think most people can get this. Yeah. So the easy answer is fish. And both species rely heavily on fish. But osprey or fish hawk rely completely, that's all they eat is fish. So I threw this picture in because I don't know if anybody has seen an osprey fishing or doing a dive for fish, where they go in like this feet first and just crash into the water. It's pretty dramatic and pretty amazing to watch. Super cool. And research has shown that if they're very successful at fishing, they catch on average on each dive about a quarter of the time they're successful at coming out with fish. Pretty good success rate. So eagles are a little bit more interesting, a little bit more diverse in what they can eat. So here's one of those pictures from up on the nest. We got or a DNR colleague who climbs the nests and bands young. So you can see, yeah, they certainly eat fish. They have fish up there, but they got some bird feathers, probably most likely a crow or a raven that they catch and kill. They got turtle shells up there, so they eat turtles that they might find. And we got a raccoon that they were able to get up into the middle.
So they eat other birds. Would that be considered like a form of cannibalism, I guess?
Cannibalism would be like, and this does happen in birds of prey raptors, is that like the young will actually eat other young. If their prey base is diminished, they will cannibalize some of the other young in the nest. There's a lot about it. But this is more just like, yeah, predator prey, eating other birds. And there's other, yeah, you guys probably know other hawks that Cooper's hawk that feeds. It is. For sure. Yeah. And the other part of it is, so some of them, they hatch, the eggs hatch asynchronously. So each one, like one will hatch one day, another one will hatch another day, and so forth and so on. And so the ones that hatch later are smaller, and they don't get the food because the other ones are bigger and more aggressive. Those are the ones that usually get the food when the parents come back with it, and they eventually just starve or a harsh world. It's kind of brutal, but yeah, that's another reason why they don't. It's not all 3 or 4 of them would survive. And then we know, that eagles spend some time on the ground, and especially in winter time, they'll scavenge a lot. Any carcasses that they can find. So they're much more diverse in their diet and omnivores and what they might eat. So not just exclusively fish. And being on the ground and scavenging and eating carcasses gets them into trouble, which we'll talk about a little bit here as well. How long does a bald eagle or osprey typically live? Anybody have a guess? Yeah, you guys are wrong. Very close. So eagles, live to right around on average 20 years. The oldest known recorded one was 38 years old. This was from a banded bird in New York State that unfortunately was hit by a car, died, but they were able to age it, like looking back at when it was banded as a young bird, and it was at least 38 years old. So pretty cool. Osprey, not quite as long, so to around 15 years on average, but there have been some that have been aged to at least 25 years old. So where do eagles and ospreys nest? So eagles prefer in the forest a little bit more, and if they are in the forest or in a canopy, they will usually look for a super canopy tree, usually a pine tree that's taller than all the other trees, and that's where they'll often put their nests. They also will use big old cottonwoods or oak trees. So basically, they're looking for a big, strong, sturdy tree that can hold their massive nest. They will take over on occasion osprey nests, including on platforms. Not that often, but sometimes they do. And then a prime example of this is there's now an eagle nest in the Arboretum, right on the Arboretum Drive on Lake Waver there, that started out as an osprey nest a couple of years ago, and now there's eagles nesting in that one. If you make that drive on Arboretum Drive, you can see it very clearly from the road there. And then the habitat that they like, of course, is along rivers, streams, and lakes. But as they started to really kind of fill in a lot of those rivers and streams and lakes, we have seen them starting to move away from water a little bit. And when we were doing eagle flights, we were seeing them out in the middle of a cornfield or on the edge of a cornfield or ag field in a tree row. So getting further and further away from water in some cases. And then osprey, so they're very dependent on people now. So over 80% of osprey nests in the state are on some kind of a man-made structure. So of course they're very fond of osprey nest platforms that people put up for them, cell towers, utility poles, light poles. So these get them into trouble also a little bit. So we'll talk about that too. So this shift to man-made structures was largely due to reduce the risk of predation, and then a loss of maybe a lack of snags. There was a time when foresters and loggers were wanting to get rid of all the snags, which ospreys like to use for nesting, and then shoreline development probably also limited some of their available habitat. And then interestingly, they're loosely colonial nesters. So when we think of raptors, we think of them being very territorial and defending their nest area. They'll defend their immediate nest from other ospreys, but they're very tolerant of other ospreys in the vicinity or in the area. So we'll see them kind of in a power line corridor. Maybe we'll see 3, 4 of nests with different pairs on different power line structures, all lining up along the corridor. So they're somewhat loosely colonial nesters. And then a big thing is they always like to be away from eagles and whenever possible, especially out of a sight line of an eagle nest. So they like to get away from them whenever possible. And because of that, they've kind of got pushed into like impoundments and reservoirs, maybe where there's not as many eagles, inland lakes, so off the river, but maybe a backwater lake or something, and shallower water and marsh areas. So they kind of will tolerate more shallow lakes and ponds than eagles would. So that's where they end up finding their homes. Okay, so that's it for the quiz. You guys did well. Now we're gonna get into a little bit about some of the surveys that we have done with the DNR, and how the eagles and ospreys are doing in the state. Some of the monitoring efforts that are taking place. And then we'll get into some of those management concerns and a couple health issues that eagles and ospreys face. So, yeah, like I said, the DNR used to do eagle and osprey surveys annually. So it was about a 50-year survey dating back to 1973 is when we first started doing flight surveys for them. And we were doing 2 surveys at that time. So both of these species were endangered, so it was justified and the need to see how they were doing and track their population. So we would do an initial occupancy flight in early spring for eagles. That would mean in southern Wisconsin, at least usually fly in early March when they're on the nest incubating or have babies. For ospreys, it'd be a couple months later in mid-May. And we would do flight, we'd take a plane like that out and fly all the known nests that we were aware of to go see if they were active that year. And then we'd follow that up with a productivity flight, usually a couple months later, to see how many, well, we would know which ones were active from the first flight, and we would recheck those to see how many young were produced and how many were, they'd usually still be in the nest in mid-May, but we could get an idea of how many were present at that time, get a better idea of how productive they were. So because the state is big, we couldn't fly, one person couldn't fly them all, so we broke the state up into several different regions. I was flying when we were doing this in Area 6, so including Dane County here and Southwest Wisconsin, and then we have folks flying in other parts of the state as well. This is kind of what we were looking for when we were in the plane. So we would be doing our initial, when I started doing it in 2016, we were only basically doing 1 flight at that time. We had already cut out the productivity flight. We were just doing active or occupancy flights. So we would go out, we would fly, we kind of know where we have a GPS point where the nest was at, and we'd find them. And so like in a pine, you can see the bird sitting on the nest there. That's kind of a easy pine tree to find them in. It's not always that easy. And then we see them, of course, in deciduous trees, and you could see those as you're approaching for, I don't know, half mile or a mile away. They'd stick out like a sore thumb. But then we have like these nests in a pine that were kind of hidden that would be pretty difficult to see from the airplane. Sometimes we'd have to circle around a couple times to see if we could actually see where the nest was and see if we could see a bird or any eggs in there. So not for the, if you were queasy, that's when you would get sick, because when you started circling, you at least take circles around it, and that's true to try and find the nest. And then we have a map like this where we would plot out all of our eagle nests. So you can really see from this kind of how they obviously favor rivers and Lake Wisconsin there, and then some of these smaller rivers. But then, yeah, you see occasional nests that would be off the water as well. So we'd have the known nests. We get reports of new nests each year from citizens or observers that say, hey, there's a nest here. And we didn't know about it, so we'd add that to our survey. And then we would kind of plot out our path for the pilot. So we would kind of draw these green lines. So this is Crawford County and Grant County. So we're coming from the northeast. All right, let's fly down here, hit these nests along the river, and then we'll go up. Let's go up to Kickapoo, check out these nests, see what's going on there, and then circle back around, hit these, and then down here and fly Wisconsin River again. And as we were doing that, we'd be checking them, then we'd be making notes on. So this would be, yeah, they were incubating, so we put an eye there. This one we found the nest, but it was empty. This was maybe a new nest. So they would have, they'll make several nests in their territory. Sometimes they'll add a new nest. So this one went from Crawford 09, so A would be another second nest that they added, and they were using that. So that's kind of what we were doing when we were flying, doing our flights, keeping track of how they did. Okay, so here's kind of, that trajectory that I talked about. So when we plot all those survey data over the years, so all the way back to 1973, we were way down here. And then they just have continually increased pretty much almost every year, exponentially increasing. And then in 2019, like I said, that was our last full statewide survey that we did with about 1,700 nesting pairs in Wisconsin. And then it was just made a decision that we thought we were going to maybe cut back and maybe just do flights every 5 years just to kind of monitor and keep track of them. But then not long after that, our management team decided, we don't need to fly. We don't need to do these surveys anymore. It's too expensive and birds have recovered and they're seemingly doing fine. But we'll talk a little bit about, we are keeping track of them, of course. If the need were to arise that for some reason the numbers would seemingly start to go down, we could reinstitute the surveys again. The exciting news a couple of years ago in 2022 was that eagles started nesting in Milwaukee County for the first time. So that made there was eagles nesting in every county in the state, so all 72 counties. So that was kind of big news at the time. There's actually probably at least 3 or 4 or maybe half dozen eagles nests in Milwaukee County now. And then, you can just kind of see this map kind of, really well, or illustrates really well where the eagles are kind of focused, where their prime habitat is up along Lake Superior coastline. Again, like ospreys, like we looked at, was kind of northwest lakes area, the Northern Highlands, which has one of the highest densities of lakes in the world, the Mississippi River, the Wisconsin River. So, that's where eagles are found or distributed throughout the state. And then this is just a map that kind of shows really nicely how they rebounded in Wisconsin. I feel when we first started the survey in 1974, they were all kind of restricted to those kind of core areas in the north, and they just slowly kind of repopulated much of the state. So zooming in a little bit in my area, in area 6, it's kind of southwest Wisconsin. Back when they first started to show up in southern Wisconsin, there was only 2 in 1985 in southwest Wisconsin, and they continually increased until 2015 when there was almost 100 nesting pairs in southwest Wisconsin. So this doesn't include the Mississippi River, but so we have some maps kind of showing there's those 2 in 1985 on the Wisconsin and backwaters of the Mississippi. 1995, 10 years later, they really started to fill in on the Wisconsin River a little bit. Started to go up to Kickapoo and Crawford County. By 2005, still on those kind of main river systems, but then they're starting to show up in the Sugar River. I think that's the Pecatonica, the Baraboo River, moving further other reaches of the Wisconsin River. And then by 2015, just kind of showing up everywhere. Okay, so here's what I was talking about, like the future of keeping an eye on bald eagles. So we're partnered with the Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance, which was formerly Madison Audubon Society. They changed their name, but they approached us in 2018. There was a guy who had lived in Colorado, and they started an eagle nest watch program out there. And he's like, hey, maybe we should start one here in Wisconsin. We're like, yeah, that sounds great. They were focused basically just in Dane County at that time. That was in 2018. So they have volunteers that would sign up to go out and monitor eagle nests. They would have their own assigned eagle nest. They would go out for that whole kind of 4-month period to their one eagle nest. They go out once a week for about half an hour, an hour, and just see what's going on. If the eagles are present and it's active, they can see any young, and then they'd follow through to the fledgling period, and they could get us information on productivity and if the eagles were successful in fledging young. So they were getting us way better information than we were getting with just a single flight. And now, so in 2025, these are all the counties that they're monitoring eagle nests in, and they're in over 40 counties now in Wisconsin. So the program has been hugely popular and really successful and continues to grow. So they're giving us really good information on going forward on how the eagle populations have been. And then a little bit on ospreys. So how are they doing? So here's kind of the last time we did full statewide osprey surveys was also in 2019. And this is kind of a map of the counties and where they were found, how many in each county. So you can see again, the highest numbers were like up in Oneida County, Washburn's way in the Burnett. And again, kind of not many in the driftless area, but yeah, all throughout southern Wisconsin, southeast Wisconsin. And then here's our graph over there. We stopped monitoring basically when they were delisted in 2009. Continued to monitor them for a few years, and then we started to cut back on doing surveys for osprey as well. But they've kind of, so they went up, and then they hit the 500 or so nesting pairs in the state. They've really kind of plateaued there around 500 or a little over 500. So we think that's maybe a couple of different things. Maybe they reached carrying capacity, or all the suitable habitat in the state was occupied right around that number. Or the other theory is that as the eagle numbers have continued to go up, maybe now there's too many eagles, so maybe they're keeping the osprey population in check. So yeah, but they continue to kind of hang out around that 500 or so nesting pairs. And then, so maybe some of you are familiar with the Wisconsin Breeding Bird Atlas. They just finished, or I guess probably about 5 years ago now, finished the second Breeding Bird Atlas in 2019. So the first one took place from 1995 to 2000, and we did the second one in 2015 and 2019. And it really focuses on the distribution of a bird species in the state, so they can generate a map like this showing where the birds are found in the state. These are blocks, basically a 6x6 block, and the bird was present in that block somewhere. And then since we had a second go around with the atlas, we could compare blocks from where they were on the first atlas to the second atlas. So, and these are just ones that were surveyed completely, the blocks that were surveyed completely in the first atlas and the second atlas, uniformly, I guess is probably how it should be said. So we can color code the first atlas. They were only found in the yellow blocks. That was 44. The second atlas, it jumped all the way up to 86 blocks. That was just the second atlas. And then they were found in both atlas periods and 45. Those would be the black. So the blue ones were just the second atlas. So you can really see how they kind of, in that 20-year period, kind of filled in or moved into southern and southeastern Wisconsin, especially. And yeah, it does show the change is a positive change. So a plus 19, meaning that there was more blocks found that they were occupied this time. So that's basically like, yeah, how are we monitoring osprey going forward So we have projects like the Breeding Bird Atlas. So we'll have another one, a third one, starting in 2035. So then we'll be able to compare that to this most recent one and the first one. And then citizen science projects like eBird. I don't know if people are familiar with eBird. That is run by Cornell Lab of Ornithology. They have this really great platform that they have kind of accumulated all this data that people, citizens collect out the field and contribute it either on their phone or on their computer, and it all is in a central database. And then now they're looking at trends. They can show from the eBird data, they can show maps like this. They looked at from 2012 to 2022. You can look at across the whole US how the species is doing. So this is an osprey map. Then you can zoom in a little bit more on Wisconsin specifically. And blue is good, so their trend is increasing. Again, you see southeast Wisconsin is doing good. And then they can come up with a figure of how they're increasing. So in this case, they're increasing by about 4.2% over that 10-year period. So we have that at our disposal. We have the federal breeding bird survey, which is a roadside based survey that's run by a US Geological Survey that's been done for over 60 years now. The roadside survey is not ideal for osprey or other raptors, but it's something that we can look at. And then there's this raptor population index, which kind of looks at migration numbers at hot count locations around the country. And they're also showing stable to increasing trends for osprey. So good news for osprey kind of all around. And then I threw in this map. So it's a little bit dated. It's still probably mostly 2019. I think there's a few 2020 or 2021 nests, but these are so where we're at here in the Dane County, Madison chain of lakes, and it's plotting the eagle and osprey nest locations. So eagles are this purple, and then the osprey are this green. So so like this is an eagle nest that is up in Middleton at Pheasant Branch. Osprey up at Governor Knowles, I think, on a nesting platform there. Some osprey, they like to nest. Maybe you've seen them at Nine Springs, usually on a cell tower or on a power line. They're there. There's one of the first eagle nests on Madison chain of lakes was in Monona. They're on the south shore of Monona, and now we were talking. They're showing up in a lot of other places, which we don't have those plotted up. I think one right off the belt line there in the upper Waubesa or upper Butt Lake. So yeah, you can kind of see how the osprey are a little bit more colonial. There'll be several of them nesting in an area. Eagles like spread out a little bit more. So yeah, health concerns or health issues. Gruesome picture. So this was from a study in 2000 to 2007 over almost 600 eagles. What was causing their mortality? So by far the biggest one causing mortality is trauma. Talk about that here in the next slide. And then there's lead poisoning. This next, undetermined, which might be, it's like a nest blowing out of a tree, the nest tree falling over, electrocution happens some. And then zooming in a little bit on the trauma, what is causing the trauma? So by far the biggest one is vehicle collisions. So we talked a little bit about how the eagles will scavenge. So this is largely in the wintertime. A lot of times there will be a car hit deer on the side of the road. So they'll be scavenging off of the eagle on the side of the road. The car will come by. They get scared and they flush and they try and fly off, but they can't get up in the air fast enough to get hit by it. See that far too often. And there's a couple other ones, gunshot. Yeah, crazy that we still see or hear of people shooting eagles and raptors. It still happens occasionally. Con-specific aggression, that's eagles fighting with other individual eagles. So maybe a territorial dispute or a pair fighting with another pair. They do die sometimes that way.
It's mostly adult eagles, one of the categories would fall from height, would that be just
That would probably be young ones, yeah. Falling out of the nest before they're ready to actually fly or fledge, yeah. And then, yeah, talking about lead poisoning. So this was from a DNR study in 2009. This was published where they looked at when the lead poisoning was occurring. So kind of throughout the year, but yeah, definitely a spike in the winter time. So kind of coinciding with the deer hunting season. So a deer gets wounded but doesn't die and runs off with a lead bullet, and when the eagles find that and they're scavenging on that eagle or on that deer carcass, and they get lead poisoning. So yeah, without a doubt, there's lead issues during the winter time and because of hunting. So yeah, trying to get the word out about the concerns and threats of lead bullets and lead tackle as well for fishing, maybe fish and loons. That's certainly an issue. Yeah, of course, there hasn't been any legislation or anything to prevent people from using lead shot, but yeah, I think people think about or are concerned about birds and the impacts of lead. Yeah, and certainly considering using some kind of other bullets would be great. And then kind of fairly recently, there was this new threat that kind of came on the scene, and that was disease. So avian influenza spreading throughout the country. And then this is some of the Vaudeville Nest Watch data. So from a couple of years ago, so they're tracking number of nests that failed, how many were successful. So in 2023, they were monitoring 204 nests. Only 36 failed, but in 2022, out of 109 nests, 70 of them failed. That year, there was a big outbreak of avian influenza. So, yeah, we think that was the cause of all these failures in the nests. So, a very high number. Yeah, for a year there, we were very, very concerned about what this was going to mean for eagle populations and other raptors and other birds. But 2023 was much better. 2024, it's not up here, but there wasn't nearly that kind of failure rate either. I haven't seen any. We see in data from 2025 soon, but it seemed like it was just a 1 year kind of blip. But yeah, something to certainly be aware of and continue to monitor going forward. So through there, yeah, watching these nests, they're seeing other forms of failure to the nest was lightning strikes, heavy winds blowing over a tree or knocking the nest out of the tree, heavy rainfall, snow events, we see that. Definitely lead poisoning. And then there's other disturbance issues that maybe cause a nest to fail sometimes. There's the prescribed burns underneath the nest or other human activity. So lots of issues going on. And then Osprey, so we hear about this a lot. So these are what we were talking about before, where they place their nests on. This is a light pole in Madison on Goodman Field, I think. They were nesting on there. Sometimes those lights heat up, cause the nest to catch fire, start a fire. And then this is a power line. So those wooden power lines that have two parallel, beams, they like to nest on those. That also is a concern for electrocution or starting a fire. And then we see them on cell towers and other towers. Then we get calls from, so we have an avoidance period during the active season, basically from April 1st to August 15th. So the cell tower folks get calls all the time. Can we remove this nest? Can we go up and make these repairs? Basically, from April 1st to August 15th, they're not supposed to do any work unless it's an emergency. Then they can go up there and make emergency repairs. Usually we try and ask them to do it as quick as possible, limit it to 1 day, kind of do it during the heat of the day so there's no threat of like the heat or the eggs like freezing or something like that. And we have found that ospreys are pretty tolerant of people, more so than eagles. So a 1 day, short period of time, they will tolerate people going up there and not abandon the nest. And then after the nesting season, so in the winter when the birds are gone, they can remove the nest if they need to. Sometimes they'll remove a nest from like that tower line and put up a platform where it'll be in a much safer place for the birds and for the wires and stuff too. So that's an option. But yeah, so basically we are lucky that osprey, we have a couple good measures that we can do to accommodate ospreys that work really well. So we can build a platform nearby. So we can, like on a power line, we can put a platform in a safe place. We can do that. We can drop a large pillar and put a platform on that. There's some considerations or recommendations. Ospreys like to nest on the highest spot that's available to them. So if we put a platform next to somewhere where we don't want them nesting, we can put that and just make sure that it's above where they're nesting now. And they will readily adopt that new nesting location. And then they don't like to be in the forest like eagles. So usually we want to make sure that it's away from any trees, obviously near water. They like to be near water. And then if they are in a somewhat of a forest, just make sure that it's up high above the other canopy trees. And then away from where there's a lot of people or a lot of activity. So those are some of the considerations that work really well for osprey. And then, yeah, just some people are interested in more information on eagles and ospreys. So we have DNR we have a website specifically for eagles. So you can go to dnr.wi.gov and put in bald eagle and it'll bring up our eagle page. So on there we have information on winter eagle watching days, events. We keep that up to date. So on the time, like on some of the big rivers, Mississippi, Wisconsin, the Fox, a lot of those communities hold eagle watching events. As long as those rivers are open, which they usually are. So like in Sauk City on the Wisconsin, it's focused right on around the dam that keeps the water open. And eagles tend to congregate there, so you can go up there. And in the wintertime and see really high numbers of eagles kind of roosting and fishing along the river in other parts of the state. We talked a little bit about eagle protections on our page, and then some of our past survey results. And then for osprey, yeah, there's Cordell. They're all about birds, has a really great page on all the different bird species. And then we're going to be coming out with a new book with all the results from the second Wisconsin Breeding Bird Atlas. And that'll probably be out sometime later in 2026. So you can keep an eye out for that. Have a page dedicated to each bird species that nests in Wisconsin. I think we're getting late on time, so I'm not going to talk any about eagle protection, but it's basically all at the federal level. There's two acts, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which covers all native bird species and the bow and golden eagle protection act that protects the birds and their nests and feathers and parts as well. And then, you can, if you want to help, you can participate in the Bald Eagle Nest Watch, or you can contribute to our program, which is the Endangered Resources Program. We have a license plate, so people that really love eagles, we have a bald eagle license plate now, and a portion of the proceeds annually from that plate goes to our Endangered Resources Program. We have a tax checkoff. You can donate online. And that is it. Very much. I was gonna leave some time for questions.
We also have a link on our website for the National Endangered Fund. So if you were interested in looking into that, you can click that from this event's webpage. So, yep.
This will be streamed again, or, I mean, it's live now.
It's live right now, and then Ben with the cable channel will be editing and putting it onto the McFarland cable channel. So
Do you have a
Are
question?
there any cameras that are in Wisconsin?
There's a big famous one in Decorah, Iowa, that the National Eagle Center has it on a nesting. It's on the Mississippi River. Yeah, Trumbull has one.
It has a eagle cam.
Okay. On the refuge.
I'm not sure. I just noticed that it was Trumbull because those birds are just fledging
Yeah.
now, so.
Okay. Cool. Yeah.
I have a question. When the eagles go to the Sauk City, are they coming from all over the state? Someone
Yeah.
asked me, and then do they like take a vacation for a couple weeks?
Yeah, so those are, I mean, there's a mix of maybe some local eagles, but those are, ones that have migrated from northern Wisconsin or further north in Canada. And they're just moving south because
It's all
it's
open
kind of
water.
frozen up, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Open water. And then lower Wisconsin, in particular, Mississippi too, just presents perfect habitat with the forested reaches along the river where they can get protection from the elements and then ample food source with the river, open river and open water right there. So it's a mix, but a lot of it's more northerly birds that are
Oh, okay.
coming down.
And then we had ospreys and eagles fighting in McFarland.
Yeah,
Who wins?
that's usually eagles like.
The eagle will
Yeah.
win over the osprey.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they're notorious for harassing osprey and stealing their fish too. They do that.
Yeah, we have the eagles are on the one that you mentioned, the Stoughton exit off the Beltline.
Okay,
The eagles are there, and then we have a pair of ospreys over the baseball field in McFarland, across from the Green Lantern, which is now the Mekong restaurant. There's ospreys there, and we think that the ospreys are coming to the low water levels for fishing, and then the eagles are coming in and trying to steal.
Yeah.
And so, and then the other nest we're not so sure about. There's a couple, people have told us there's an eagle nest south of McFarland, and the ospreys are at Fish Lake. Fish Camp?
Kind of like.
Fish Camp, right.
And that's by Lewis Park in Elview too.
Oh, there is? Eagle or osprey?
I believe Eagle. It was a couple of years ago, so I don't know how accurate
Okay.
that information is now, but there used to be nests kind of by that area. One. Yep, by Lewis and then kind of by Elview.
So we regularly see this eagle osprey drama playing out. About one of the joggers came running through and said, "Fist fight in the sky." It's a fist fight." I want to see those talons going out.
yeah, we've heard stories, we've seen video of like mostly it's eagles fighting. They'll lock talons, sometimes it's maybe a courtship thing too, but
Yeah.
sometimes they're fighting and lock their talons and they're falling from the sky and actually there's one video you can see them crashing to the ground. into the lake.
Once they-
Sometimes they get tangled and things.
Once we think the young osprey have left or are spending more time away from the nest, what do the young ones do then? Like the eagles too, do they completely move to a different territory or do they
Yeah, they'll move out to their own territory.
on their own?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, parents will kick them out. And, yeah, but they'll have to
Okay.
go off on their own and find their own location. And I was reading that, yeah, osprey, the first year they'll migrate down south, and the first year birds, it said that they actually stay down there for that first nest or the first summer season, and then they come back the next year after that. So,
thank you, this was wonderful.
Is Florida always been on top that has that many eagles?
yeah, so, yeah.
Yeah, people thought that were up here and then just one.
Yeah, I think it's like all the water and then all the big wetlands, marshes. I guess, you know, there's certainly a lot of people too, but these birds are becoming, yeah, more like pretty much have had to, but becoming more and more tolerant to people. Yeah, we see them putting up nests in parks that are visited by people a lot, and yeah, when they choose to put up a nest there, yeah, they know, I think they know what they're getting themselves into. And to become accustomed to people. Yeah, it's mostly good.
I took a look into the whole coloring of the eye thing, and they're not 100% sure, but they do think it could be related to once it turns that bright yellow, that means they're mature and ready to breed. And so that's what they're thinking it could be, but there's always exceptions to that. So,
No, there's a lot of raptors, slippers, Cooper's hawks, mouse hawks that do the same thing when they're young, they have yellow eyes. Turns orange or vice versa. It's a common thing.
well, thank you so much, Rich, for coming. And thank all of you